Burisma. You testified about a time when an oligarch named Zlochevsky, I think it was self-dealing, awarding himself contracts. When was that?
To the best of my knowledge, he was Minister of Minister of Ecology under President Yanukovych from 2010 to 2012. And at the time, licenses to have substrata exploration of gas were awarded by a subdivision of the Ministry of Ecology.
So this corrupt self-dealing then was approximately 7 years, at least 7 years before the events that bring us here today, the phone call on the 25th and the events around it?
Correct. His time as minister was 2010 to 2012. Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma in 2014.
And you've read the call transcript, have you not?
I have, and I have it in front of me, but I haven't read it for about a month.
Is there any mention in the discussion with President Trump and President Zelensky of this oligarch Zlochevsky, who 7 years earlier had been self-dealing?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Is there a discussion of awarding contracts to oneself or the corrupt acts in the 2012 to 2014 timeframe?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Now, what the president brings up is CrowdStrike, the server, and the Bidens. Am I right?
I see that here, yes.
There was no discussion on that call of setting up an anti-corruption court or looking into corruption among oligarchs or companies in general. The president's comments were focused on two things, 2016 and the Bidens. Am I right?
I believe so, yes.
Now, you testified in your opening statement, I do not believe the United States should ask other countries to engage in selective politically associated investigations or prosecutions against opponents of those in power, because such selective actions undermine the rule of law regardless of the country. The selective politically associated investigations or prosecutions against opponents of those in power, are you referring to the Bidens there?
I'm referring as a general principle about the promotion of the rule of law.
But that would apply to the President of the United States seeking an investigation of his political opponent, would it not?
It could be interpreted that way, yes, sir.
And I take it in your discussions, Ambassador Taylor, with Ambassador Sondland or others, what was communicated to you was that the president wanted investigations into 2016 and the Bidens, not into an oligarch named Zlochevsky or self-dealing, but 2016 and the Bidens. Was that your understanding?
That was my understanding.
And in fact, when you said your staff overheard this call between Ambassador Sondland and the president, in that call, the president brings up investigation, does he not?
He did.
And immediately after the president gets off the phone with Sondland, Sondland is asked by your staff, what does the president think about Ukraine? And his answer is, he's just interested in the Bidens, am I right?
He said he was more interested in the Bidens.
More interested in the Bidens. No discussion of Zlochevsky or Chalupa or things that happened 7 years ago. He was interested in the Bidens.
Yes, sir.
Now, I think you also testified that Ambassador Sondland told you that President Trump wanted Zelensky in a public box. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And by public box, did that mean that private statements, private promises to do this investigation of 2016 of the Bidens were not enough? He had to go on TV. He had to go public in some way because the president wanted him in that box. Is that your understanding?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly what he had in mind, and I'm not sure what Ambassador Sondland had in mind, who was the one who mentioned that to me. That's the implication. The implication was it needed to be public as opposed to being a private assurance.
And I think you said in that same call, you asked Ambassador Sondland to push back on President Trump's demand. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
So you understood from your conversation with Sondland, this was the president's demand, not Sondland's demand, the president's demand, and you wanted Sondland to push back. Am I right?
What I wanted to, so Ambassador Sondland was clearly able to have conversations with the president. And I thought that the pressure on another president, on President Zelensky, was not a good idea from either president's standpoint. So I suggested in that phone call with Ambassador Sondland that he, since he frequently had conversation with the president, could make that point.
Well, and I think the way you express yourself is you wanted Sondland to push back on President Trump's demand, right?
Yes, sir.
So as your understanding from talking to Sondland, this is what the president wanted him to do, and you wanted Sondland to push back?
I asked Ambassador Sondland to push back. That's correct.
And in fact, even after the aid was ultimately released, even after the White House learns of the whistleblower complaint and the congressional investigation, the aid is released, even after those events, you were still worried that Zelensky was going to feel it necessary to go on CNN and announce these investigations, were you not?
Mr. Chairman, I was still worried that he might do that. So yes, I thought that would be a bad idea. And so when there was some indication that there might still be a plan for the CNN interview in New York, which was upcoming at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, I was worried. I wanted to be sure that that didn't happen, so I addressed it with the Zelensky staff.
Now, and I think you said earlier that Dan Liuk, the national security advisor then for Zelensky, was concerned Zelensky didn't want to be used as some tool in American politics. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
So Zelensky didn't want to go on TV and announce political investigations that he thought would mire him in U.S. politics, right?
He knew that he and his advisors knew that it's a bad idea to interfere in other nations' elections. Yes, sir.
But nonetheless, it appeared until the aid was lifted, the hold was lifted, that he felt compelled to do it.
He was making plans, his staff was making plans to have him make some kind of announcement, I don't know what it would have been, on CNN in public.
Even though he didn't want to be marred in U.S. politics?
Even though he knew it was a bad idea to interfere in other people's elections.
Mr. Nunes, you are recognized for 7 minutes and 10 seconds.
I thank the gentleman for that. Ambassador Taylor, you said in your deposition that the first time you heard about this issue with Rudy Giuliani, and I'm paraphrasing, but you read it in the New York Times. Is that correct?
I do remember that I do remember noticing about Mr. Giuliani being involved in this in that article. Yes, sir.
Okay. I think one of the mothers of all conspiracy theories is that somehow the President of the United States would want a country that he doesn't even like, he doesn't want to give foreign aid to have the Ukrainians start an investigation into Biden's. With that, I yield to Mr. Jordan.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Ambassador Taylor, thank you for being here. Aid's held up on July 18th, is that right?
That's when I first heard about it, Mr.
And then it's released, Ambassador Taylor, on September 11th. And we know that from your deposition, in those 55 days that aid is delayed, you met with President Zelensky 3 times. The first one was July 26th, the day after the famous call now between President Trump and President Zelensky. President Zelensky meets with you, Ambassador Volker, and Ambassador Sondland. And again, according to your deposition and your testimony, there was no linkage of security assistance dollars to investigating Burisma or the Bidens. Second meeting is August 27th. Again, in this 55-day time frame, second meeting is August 27th. President Zelensky meets with you and Ambassador Bolton and others. And again, there's no linkage of dollars, security assistance dollars, to an investigation of the Bidens. And then, of course, the third meeting is September 5th. President Zelensky meets with you and Senators Johnson and Murphy. And once again, there was no linkage of security assistance dollars to an investigation of Burisma or the Bidens. 3 meetings with the president of Ukraine, the new president, and no linkage. That's accurate?
Mr. Jordan, it's certainly accurate on the first two meetings because, to my knowledge, the Ukrainians were not aware of the hold on assistance until the 29th of August.
So the Politico article.
Political article. The third meeting that you mentioned with the Senators Murphy and Senator Johnson, there was discussion of the security assistance, but
no linkage.
But there was not discussion of linkage.
3 meetings face-to-face with President Zelensky, no linkage. Yet, in your deposition, you said this, and you said it again the first hour of the majority. My clear understanding was security assistance money would not come until President Zelensky committed to pursue the investigation. My clear understanding was they weren't going to get the money until President Zelensky committed to pursue the investigations. Now, with all due respect, Ambassador, your clear understanding was obviously wrong because it didn't happen. President Zelensky didn't announce he was going to investigate Burisma or the Bidens. He didn't do a press conference and say, I'm going to investigate the Bidens, we're going to investigate Burisma. He didn't tweet about it, and you just told the ranking member he didn't do the CNN interview and announce he's going to investigate Burisma or the Bidens. So 3 face-to-face meetings, it doesn't come up, no linkage whatsoever. President Zelensky doesn't announce it before the aid is released on the 11th. And yet you said you have a clear understanding that those 2 things were going to happen. The money was going to get released, but not until there was an investigation, and that, in fact, didn't happen. So what I'm wondering is, where did you get this clear understanding?
As I testified, Mr. Jordan, this came from Ambassador Sondland.
Well, can you hold 1 second, Ambassador? I'm going to bring you a piece of paper from Ambassador Sondland's statement.
Very good.
And you can take a look at this. Go ahead, though. I want to let you finish.
So, Mr. Jordan, should I read this or?
No, I just want you to have it because I'm going to read it.
Oh, very good, very good.
Yeah, but I wanted you to go ahead and finish. You said, Ambassador, you got this from Ambassador Sondland.
That is correct. Ambassador Sondland also said that he talked to President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak and had told them that although this was not a quid pro quo, if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate. That was one point. It was also the case.
Mr. Morrison talked to you, right?
No, what I was going to say is Ambassador Sondland also told me that he recognized that it was a mistake to have told the Ukrainians that only the meeting with the president in the Oval Office was held up on in order to get these investigations. No, it was not just the meeting, it was also the security system. That is, everything was. So those two discussions.
No, I understand.
Okay.
All right, so again, just to recap, you had 3 meetings with President Zelensky. No linkage in those 3 meetings came up. Ambassador Zelensky didn't announce that he was going to do any investigation of the Bidens or Burismas before the aid was released. He didn't do a tweet, didn't do anything on CNN, didn't do any of that. President Zelensky, excuse me.
Right.
And then what you have in front of you is an addendum that Mr. Sondland made to his testimony that we got a couple weeks ago. It says, Declaration of Ambassador Gordon Sondland. I, Gordon Sondland, do hereby swear and affirm as follows. I want you to look at point number 2, bullet point number 2, second sentence. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yermak on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. Now, this is his clarification. Let me read it one more time. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yermak on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. We got 6 people having 4 conversations in 1 sentence, and you just told me this is where you got your clear understanding. Which, I mean, even though you had 3 opportunities with President Zelensky for him to tell you, you know what? We're going to do these investigations to get the aid. Didn't tell you 3 different times. Never makes an announcement, never tweets about it, never does a CNN interview. Ambassador, you weren't on the call, were you? The president, you didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
You had 3 meetings again with Zelensky and it didn't come up.
And 2 of those they had never heard about as far as I know.
And President
There was no reason for it to come
President
up.
Zelensky never made an announcement. This is what I can't believe. And you're their star witness. You're their first witness.
Mr.
You're
Jordan,
the guy. You're the guy based on this, based on, I mean, I've seen church prayer chains that are easier to understand than this. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told, now again, this is, I hereby swear and affirm from Gordon Sondland. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yermak on September 1st, 20. This all happens, by the way. This all happens, by the way, in Warsaw, where Vice President Pence meets with President Zelensky. And guess what?
Taylor,
they didn't talk about any linkage either.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Ambassador Taylor, would you like to respond?
The only response, I have 2 responses, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Mr. Jordan. Glad to take those questions. let me just say that I don't consider myself a star witness for anything.
They do. You don't.
No,
They
I
do.
don't. I'm
They
responding
do.
to, I'm responding to your
Please
question.
don't interrupt the witness.
As I think I was clear about, I'm not here to take one side or the other or to advocate any particular outcome. So let me just restate that. Second thing is that my understanding is only coming from people that I talk to.
We got that.
We got that. I think this clarification from Ambassador Sondland was because he said he didn't remember this in his first deposition. So he wanted to kind of clarify. But I think, Mr. Jordan, the way I read this, he remembers it the same way I do.
Yeah, and it's real clear, right?
It's very clear to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Taylor. Mr. Himes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony.